Your mind does not look for problems by accident. It looks for problems for protection. That is the short answer. That is the answer many people are searching for when they realize their mind never fully stops. When they notice they are always anticipating something, always imagining scenarios, always preparing for the possibility that something might go wrong. Even when life feels stable, even when nothing urgent is happening, even when everything appears to be fine, there is a feeling that is difficult to explain, a feeling that something could happen, a feeling that something needs to be checked, a feeling that you need to be prepared. And that feeling leads the mind to do something very specific. It begins to scan, it observes, it compares, it analyzes, it searches for signals, signals of change, signals of risk, signals of potential problems. This process happens all the time, quietly, automatically, without you noticing, without you choosing, without you controlling it. Because the human brain works as a prediction system. It tries to anticipate the future. It tries to avoid surprises. It tries to reduce uncertainty. And to do that, it has to search for possible problems. This is not pessimism. It is not weakness. It is not overreaction. It is a survival mechanism. For thousands of years, anticipating problems meant staying alive. Recognizing danger before others did increased the chances of survival. Identifying risk early allowed people to respond sooner, and responding sooner made a difference. That pattern became wired into the brain. It became automatic. It became natural. Today, most threats are not physical, but the system continues to function. It keeps searching. It keeps checking. It keeps scanning. A message that has not arrived yet. A result that has not been released yet. A conversation that has not happened yet. A decision that still needs to be made. These situations create uncertainty, and uncertainty activates the search system. The brain begins to ask, what could go wrong? What might change? What could happen next? These questions do not always appear as clear thoughts. Sometimes they show up as sensations, a subtle restlessness, a quiet tension, a steady sense of alertness, as if something were unfinished, as if something still needed attention, as if something might happen at any moment. That sensation drives the mind to look for answers, but when clear answers are not available, it keeps searching, it keeps scanning, it keeps evaluating. Another important point is that the brain does not scan only the external environment. It scans the future, it scans possibilities, it scans potential outcomes. It tries to predict what might happen. That requires energy. It requires attention. It requires processing. And this continuous effort can create fatigue. Not physical fatigue, but mental fatigue. The kind of tiredness that appears even when the body is still. The kind of tiredness that shows up even after rest. Because the work is not happening in the body. It is happening in the mind. It is happening in the scanning. Another factor involved in this process is what scientists call the negativity bias. The brain pays more attention to what could go wrong than to what could go right, not because it is pessimistic, but because mistakes can create risk, and risk can create harm. That is why the system prioritizes possible problems. It watches details, it notices inconsistencies, it tracks changes. This behavior increases safety, but it also increases mental effort. And greater mental effort leads to greater fatigue. Another mechanism behind this pattern is memory. The brain learns from past experiences. If something went wrong before, it records that experience. If something caused pain before, it remembers. If something created difficulty before, it prepares. This creates a pattern of vigilance, a pattern of searching, a pattern of scanning. And that pattern can continue even after the situation has changed, even after the problem has been solved, even after the risk has disappeared. Because the brain prefers to prevent. It prefers to be certain. It prefers to double-check. Another important factor is responsibility. When something depends on you, the system increases attention. It tries to predict outcomes. It tries to avoid mistakes. It tries to maintain control. That keeps the mind working in the background, even when you are resting, even when everything is quiet, even when nothing urgent is happening. The brain continues evaluating, continues checking, continues scanning. This process is invisible, but it consumes energy, and limited energy leads to fatigue. Another powerful trigger for scanning is uncertainty. The brain can tolerate effort, it can tolerate pressure, it can tolerate challenge, but uncertainty is different, because uncertainty requires constant attention, constant monitoring, constant readiness, and constant readiness consumes energy. That is why waiting can be exhausting. Waiting for results, waiting for answers, waiting for change. These situations keep the system active, keep the mind scanning, keep the body on alert. Another essential factor is prediction error. The brain is constantly predicting what will happen. When reality does not match the prediction, the brain detects a mismatch. And when it detects a mismatch, vigilance increases. Because mismatch signals risk. It signals the need for adjustment. It signals the need for attention. This creates a cycle. More mismatch, more vigilance, more scanning, more effort, and eventually, more fatigue. Another important factor is adaptation. When the brain has to scan for long periods of time, it gets used to it. It resets the baseline. What used to be temporary becomes normal. What used to be occasional becomes constant. That means the mind can keep searching for problems even in safe environments, because the behavior has become automatic. Another interesting detail is the role of silence. Silence can feel like rest, but for a system used to scanning, silence can feel like uncertainty, because silence removes predictable signals, removes movement, removes distraction. And when that happens, attention increases. The brain starts listening more carefully, watching more closely, scanning more actively. That is why some people feel more alert at night, because the environment becomes quiet, and quiet invites scanning. Another important mechanism is selective attention. The brain cannot focus on everything at once, so it chooses what to focus on. It chooses what to monitor, and very often it prioritizes potential problems, because problems require response, they require action, they require energy. Over time, this creates a habit of searching, a habit of checking, a habit of scanning, and habits become automatic. The mind learns to look for what might go wrong, learns to detect risk, learns to anticipate failure, and continues doing that without conscious effort. Another factor that keeps the mind scanning is information overload. The brain receives stimulation constantly: news, messages, notifications, decisions, responsibilities. Each piece of information requires processing. Each signal requires evaluation. When the volume of information increases, mental effort increases. And when mental effort increases, the need for rest increases. But if scanning continues, rest never fully arrives. This is one of the central challenges of modern life. More input, less recovery, more monitoring, less true rest. Another concept worth understanding is preventive vigilance. The brain tries to avoid problems before they appear. It checks details, reviews possibilities, analyzes outcomes. This behavior is useful, but when it becomes constant, it becomes exhausting. Because the system never feels finished, never feels released, never feels completely safe, and that creates a persistent sense of activity, a sense that the mind never stops, a sense that there is always something to solve. Another important idea is the difference between observing and scanning. Observing is passive, scanning is active. Observing waits, scanning searches, and searching requires effort. It requires energy. It requires attention. That is why continuous scanning leads to fatigue. Not because something is wrong with you, but because your brain is working. Another key point is survival. The brain prioritizes safety above comfort. It prefers prevention over reaction. It prefers anticipation over correction. That is why it keeps searching for signals, keeps evaluating risk, keeps scanning the environment, even when everything looks calm, even when nothing urgent is happening, even when the body is resting. Another important distinction is the difference between danger and perceived threat. Danger is real. Perceived threat is interpreted. The brain responds to both because it cannot afford to ignore a signal. That means the mind may react even when there is no real danger, not because it is broken, but because it is protective. Another essential factor is predictability. When the future feels predictable, the brain relaxes. When the future feels uncertain, the brain scans. That simple rule explains why change can feel exhausting, because change requires adaptation, and adaptation requires scanning. Another important idea is continuity. Scanning does not happen once. It happens repeatedly, throughout the day, throughout the night, throughout the week, until the system perceives stability, until it recognizes safety, until it detects predictability. Only then does scanning begin to slow down. Only then does the mind begin to settle. Only then does the body begin to relax. And that leads to an important realization. Your mind is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect you. It is trying to maintain safety. It is trying to avoid surprise. It is trying to prevent risk. Even when that effort feels excessive, even when it feels tiring, even when it feels unnecessary. Understanding this changes how you interpret your own fatigue. You are not failing. You are not weak. You are not doing something wrong. You are living with a system designed to survive, a system trained to anticipate, a system programmed to scan. And when that system stays active for too long, when it keeps searching for problems, when it keeps evaluating risk, when it keeps predicting the future, rest becomes difficult, not impossible, but difficult, because the brain is still working, still checking, still searching. And that brings us to the next question. If the mind keeps scanning, if the system keeps searching for problems, if the brain keeps trying to predict what could go wrong, why won't your mind let you rest? Why, even when the body stops, does the system remain active? Why, even when the day ends, does the mind keep working? That is exactly what we are going to explore next. Why your mind won't let you rest.